Welcome to War and Untold Stories. Here, we explore the hidden side of history, the daring prison escapes. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. October 12th, 2017. For most people in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, it was just another Thursday. But inside the Pasquotank Correctional Institution, it was a day that would descend into chaos and tragedy. In just a few short hours, a meticulously planned escape attempt would leave 4 dedicated prison employees dead and many more injured, exposing critical failures within the state's correctional system. This is the full story of what happened at Pasquotank. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we first need to look at the setting. The Correction Enterprises sewing plant. This wasn't just a prison, it was a workplace. Inmates here earned wages by manufacturing safety vests, embroidered items, and other textiles for state agencies. It was seen as a privilege, a chance for inmates to learn a trade and stay productive. But within this seemingly controlled environment, a small group of inmates saw an opportunity not for rehabilitation, but for a violent and desperate escape. The sewing plant was a complex space. It was a large, open warehouse filled with industrial machinery, flammable materials like fabric and thread, and, critically, a tool room stocked with an array of sharp and potentially dangerous implements: scissors, hammers, screwdrivers, and more. Access to these tools was supposed to be strictly controlled, but as investigators would later discover, the system was dangerously flawed. The 4 inmates at the heart of the plot were serving long sentences for violent crimes. Meikle Brady was serving time for attempted murder. Jonathan Monk was in for second-degree murder. Seth Frazier was convicted of burglary. And Wyseza Buckman was in for second-degree murder as well. They were all assigned to jobs inside the sewing plant. Over weeks, and perhaps even months, they began to observe the routines, the guards' movements, and most importantly, the weaknesses in security. They noticed that the tool room clerk was often distracted, and that tool checkout procedures were not always followed. They also identified a weak point in the prison's physical security: the loading dock area. If they could start a fire to create a diversion, they believed they could overwhelm the staff, break through the fences, and make a run for it. The plan was audacious, and it relied on speed, brutality, and catching the staff completely off guard. On that October afternoon, around 3 p.m., the plan was set into motion. The inmates used their access to the tool room to gather their improvised weapons. Hammers, scissors, and screwdrivers were concealed. Their first target was the tool room clerk herself, Veronica Darden. A 50-year-old mother of 2, Veronica was a 10-year veteran of the Department of Public Safety. She was known for her kindness and dedication. The inmates attacked her, beginning a wave of violence that swept through the plant. Simultaneously, others in the group started a fire in the plant's storage area, a large warehouse space filled with pallets of highly flammable materials. They piled up fabric and other combustibles, creating a blaze that would quickly grow out of control. The thick black smoke began to pour through the facility, triggering the fire alarms and adding to the panic and confusion. This was their diversion. As the smoke filled the air, the armed inmates targeted other staff members. Justin Smith, a 35-year-old correctional officer and father, was attacked and beaten. Jeffrey Howe, a 31-year-old maintenance mechanic who was there to fix a sewing machine, was also ambushed. He had only been with the department for a year. Wendy Shannon, a 49-year-old correctional officer, rushed to help her colleagues and was met with the same brutal violence. The scene inside the sewing plant was one of pure chaos. Inmates who were not part of the plot were scrambling to get away from the fire and the violence. The small number of outnumbered and unprepared correctional staff found themselves in a desperate fight for their lives. The fire grew rapidly, fueled by the synthetic materials in the warehouse. The smoke was so thick it became impossible to see, and the heat was intense. Meanwhile, the 4 lead inmates tried to make their escape. Using the tools they had stolen, they broke through an interior door and made their way towards the prison's perimeter fences. They managed to climb one fence and were attempting to scale a second when the prison's Specialized Tactical Team, the Prison Emergency Response Team, or PERT, arrived on the scene. The officers, clad in riot gear, deployed tear gas and quickly apprehended all 4 inmates before they could breach the final fence. The escape attempt itself had failed, but the cost was devastating. Firefighters and emergency responders who arrived found a horrific scene. They battled the blaze while paramedics tended to the injured. Veronica Darden and Justin Smith were pronounced dead at the scene. Jeffrey Howe and Wendy Shannon were airlifted to a hospital in critical condition. But tragically, they would both succumb to their injuries in the following days. In total, 4 dedicated public servants lost their lives. At least 10 other employees were injured, some severely. In the aftermath, the state launched a massive investigation. The sewing plant was closed permanently. The findings were damning. A report from the National Institute of Corrections pointed to a series of catastrophic failures. It found that the prison was critically understaffed, with officer vacancy rates hovering around 25%. This meant staff were overworked, corners were cut, and security protocols were not consistently enforced. The investigation revealed that the tool control system at the sewing plant was essentially broken. A shadow board system, where the outline of a tool is painted on a board so you can see if it's missing, was not being used effectively. Inmates were able to smuggle tools out of the tool room with relative ease. The report also criticized the design of the sewing plant itself, noting its multiple blind spots and the large quantity of flammable materials stored improperly. Perhaps most critically, the report highlighted a cultural problem. It suggested a sense of complacency had set in. The work program was seen as low risk, and the inmates assigned to it were not always managed with the level of security their violent histories demanded. There were simply not enough officers to supervise the more than 40 inmates working in the sprawling warehouse. The combination of understaffing, poor procedures, and a flawed physical environment created a perfect storm for disaster. The 4 inmates, Brady, Monk, Frazier, and Buckman, were all charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. The legal process was long and complex. One by one, they faced justice. Michael Brady was the first to be tried and convicted. In October 2019, a jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Wyseza Buckman was also found guilty and sentenced to death in 2020. Jonathan Monk and Seth Frazier both eventually pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families of the victims, the court proceedings brought a measure of accountability, but it could never erase their loss. The community of Elizabeth City mourned alongside them. The tragedy at Pasquotank sent shockwaves through the entire North Carolina Department of Public Safety. It served as a brutal wake-up call about the dangers of understaffing and the need for constant vigilance. In response to the incident, the state implemented sweeping changes. They invested millions in security upgrades at prisons across North Carolina, including better cameras, improved fencing, and new locking systems. They overhauled their tool and equipment control policies, implementing stricter checkout procedures and more frequent inventories. A major focus was put on recruitment and retention, with pay raises and bonuses offered to attract and keep correctional officers. The state also created new specialized teams trained to identify and manage high-risk inmates within the prison population. The Pasquotank incident is a stark reminder of the inherent dangers faced by correctional staff every single day. They are the unseen front line of our justice system, and their safety depends on proper staffing, training, and resources. The deaths of Veronica Darden, Justin Smith, Jeffrey Howe, and Wendy Shannon were not just statistics. They were individuals who dedicated their lives to public service and paid the ultimate price. Their legacy is a call for systemic change, a demand that the lessons learned from that dark day in October are never forgotten. Thank you for watching. The story of Pasquotank is a difficult one, but it's crucial for understanding the complexities and challenges within our prison system. If you found this video informative, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like us to explore. We appreciate your support.